All right. So thank you all for getting up on this beautiful. My camera is facing the window is behind me, and I have the privilege of being able to look out at one of our beautiful DC parks this morning. So I appreciate all the more that you all are on this call this morning to focus on mental health. But I hope that to focus even more on mental health this afternoon, you are able to go outside and enjoy this day that has been gifted to us. So I am Satira Streeter Corbett. I have been a clinical psychologist for 20 years this year. I received my doctorate back in 2001. And as I tell all of my clients that um, I know some stuff. I have some book knowledge. I have some experience under my belt, but I'm not the expert when it comes to mental health. I feel like we all are. I feel like the creator gives us all what we need to work through our stuff. And I, as a psychologist, help to help people become unstuck. So what I'm going to talk to you today about that stuckness and about mental health and some of the myths that we have around mental health. May I have the next slide, please? So, what is mental health? So, there's a textbook definition that I've taken from to come up with what is mental health as we are speaking about it today. So, mental health is emotional, psychological, and social well being. So, it's really how you interact with yourself, how you interact with the world, and how you interact with other people. So, that's an easy way to think about mental health, how you're interacting with those things around you and inside of you. And what mental health does is affects how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we interact. It determines how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make choices in our life. So those that are high functioning, we're going to make choices that don't harm ourselves and don't harm other people around us. Whereas if we're having more difficulty, we may do some of those destructive things, whether it is getting into relationships that we know are no good for us, whether it is doing things to our body, whether that's drinking excessively, smoking excessively, eating excessively, not eating enough. We're going to do those things if we're not functioning where we should be. But it also has some biological factors. Our mental health can be impacted by our life experiences, our family history, and a lot of it has to do with coping. So we've always heard about, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, the nature versus nurture. So how much are you born into poor mental health versus how much do you pick it up along the way as you live? But as this meme says right here, what we know is Black mental health matters. Like I had a shirt that I started to put on today, but I thought it would be a little bit too casual, and I wanted to make sure that I at least, I don't get a chance to put any jewelry or anything on nowadays. So I felt like I should at least do something to spiffy myself up, because Lord knows. But I have this shirt that was gifted to me, and it says, "I love psychology and Jesus." So it's not, either or. You can love your psychologist and love good mental health, and then pray a whole lot too. So it's really important to do both. Massey, the next slide, please. All right, but what is mental illness? And we've touched on it a little bit, but it's a behavioral or psychological syndrome or pattern that occurs in an individual that reflects an underlying psychobiological dysfunction, which causes significant distress. So it also, there's a commercial that says depression hurts, and it really does. Like you can physically, I think in the United States, at least, we try to compartmentalize and say, okay, this is our physical health, this is our emotional health, this is our relational health. But we know, especially we from that are derived from African cultures, we know that our ancestors did not separate those. That was all connected. All of how you're feeling is how you're feeling overall. So there's biological factors as well as social factors and emotional factors. And it's not expected when we're talking about a mental illness. If someone passes that you love deeply, you being sad and grieving that person, that doesn't mean you have a mental illness. And it's not, what you do that's expected in society. It's those things that kind of come outside of what the expectation is when we actually say that someone is mentally ill. Next slide. So why? Why is having good mental health important? Because at the end of the day, nothing else matters. It doesn't know. And we've been able to see this in our society. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how cute you are, how strong you are, how funny, how rich. If you don't have good mental health, it literally doesn't mean anything. And thank you for advancing to that slide, because there are some myths when it comes to mental health. As was mentioned, I started Ascension Psychological Services back in 2004 over in Anacostia. And the first thing that I was told when I started the practice was that you'll be closed in a year because Black people don't go to therapy. But what I found over the years is not only do Black people go to therapy, they come to therapy a lot because just like everyone else, we want to be functioning at our optimal state. But Black people don't go to bad therapy. So if you create therapy where they don't feel like they are valued, they don't feel like they're heard, when they feel like, the therapist is just trying to figure out who they are because they're like a foreign agent to them, then that doesn't work for therapy. And a lot of times the people who write those reports about Black people not going to therapy are those people who don't know how to connect and do therapy with our community. So that's a myth that we don't go to therapy. Another myth: men shouldn't cry or have feelings. So we're going to dispel that myth a little bit later in the presentation with one of my colleagues. Therapy is for crazy people. And I tell people all the time, I don't see any crazy people. They come to me before they get quote unquote crazy. And there's a whole concept of what does crazy mean anyway, but we'll talk about that. But a lot of times we tag people as crazy just because we don't understand them and because we can't relate to them and connect with them. So we have to put them in their own little box and say, oh, they're just crazy. We'll leave them over there to do their crazy things. But that's not what therapy is about. Therapy is for people, and people who need help, and people who need to help to do better. Another myth is asking for help is a sign of weakness. I can't think of anyone stronger than my clients that come to me that have been told that they have to be strong, that they have to handle it by themselves. And they still push through that and say, no, I need some help with this. I need to work through these things I've gone through. And I see a question coming up. What are some key indicators that you have selected a good therapist for you? And I'll touch on that in 1 second. Thank you for that question. Then another myth is you only go to therapy if something is wrong. Another myth is you can't be religious or spiritual and go to therapy. Again, that goes back to this t-shirt. I love my psychologist and I love Jesus, because I can't, as a Christian, I can't believe that God has sent me here to do this work and it's not sanctioned by him, especially because there's so many things that pull us in so many different directions that would make us not be able to be mentally fit. But having some help to work with this, and I really encourage people to think about it the same way that they think about, again, physical health. If you had issues with diabetes, if you had issues with cancer or HIV, you would go to the doctor, you would get your medication, you would do hopefully what the doctor told you to do. And it's the same thing with therapy. If you are feeling some type of way, whether it's anxious or depressed, sad, any of those things, to be able to talk to somebody about some coping strategies to be able to feel better, because you don't have to feel bad. You don't have to maintain that feeling and be in that space for a long period of time. There are resources that you have in order to pull yourself out of that and to get to a better way of functioning. The other thing, children can't have mental health functioning. They can't have mental health challenges. And it's interesting that nowadays we know, there's child psychologists, there's child psychiatrists, and we encourage children to get the help they need. We even have psychologists in schools. But about 50 years ago, there was none of that. The thought was, oh, these are kids, they're just little kids. They haven't been through anything, so they don't have any issues. We can't focus on them for therapy. But thank goodness that now that has shifted, and we know that children can suffer from different mental illnesses, and that children can also be helped in this process. Next slide, please. So what happens when we have all these myths that we keep being told and then we start to believe them ourselves, then we have issues with, discrimination. We may think that, okay, we as a people we don't deserve to get therapy. We don't deserve to have the help we need. If we're trying to deal with stuff ourselves and we're not equipped to, and it's really heavy, we end up with low self-esteem. If we don't get the help we need, we may start to believe the negative beliefs that sometimes our mind tells us about ourselves, or sometimes other people tell us about ourselves. So we internalize all that. We may be reluctant to seek help or treatment, even when things have gotten really, really tough. Another thing, if we have these myths and then our family member comes to us and say, hey, I really need some help, we may not support them. We may say, no, you just need to go pray about it. Or no, it's not that bad. Or no, when I was growing up in 1977, I had such big problems that what you're going through is nothing. You don't know anything about a struggle. We'll do all those things to disempower people from getting the help they need because we've already disempowered ourselves from getting the help we need. And then we have some fear, embarrassment, or shame surrounding asking for help. And again, one thing that's really interesting nowadays, 20 years is not extremely long to be in a career, but it's long enough for me to see some shifts and changes. And there's one thing that's become extremely popular now, and that's coaching. So if you've heard, one comes to mind that's on TV a whole lot. But if you've heard a lot of people that don't have degrees in psychology or in mental health professions, they'll say, oh, I'm a life coach. I'm going to coach you through this. I'm coaching you through your communication. I'm coaching you through your relationships. So coaching, it seems okay to have a coach to help you through things. And my position is, I don't care what you have to call it, as long as you're getting help and you're spending focus to get through what you need to get through. If you want to call it coaching, if you want to call it therapy, call it what you will, but just make sure you get some help. Next slide. So one thing about mental health issues is a lot of time the root of it is trauma and traumatic experiences. So if we were all in the same room together, which hopefully one day we will be soon, I would have taken this time to ask you, what are some trauma or traumatic experiences that we've gone through that could lead to not having the greatest of mental health? But since we're not together and since I can't see you and talk to you the way that I want to, let me just throw out some. So traumatic experiences, physical or sexual abuse, mental abuse, domestic violence, especially when we talk about kids. When we talk about kids that receive these type of traumas, those kids become adults, and it's not that you turn 18 and all of this stuff goes away. You turn 18 and you still have those memories that have sunk into your core of things you've gone through. So seeing domestic violence, being a victim of domestic violence are all traumatic experiences. Living with parents that are substance abusing, witnessing homicide, or any type of parental discord, homelessness. And that's something that unfortunately here in DC, that's something we need to talk about. I remember a long time ago, the concept of homelessness was, the person that lived under the bridge, that carried around a bag or pushed a shopping cart. But now we know that homelessness is so much more and it's so much far reaching. So we have children. There's a school in my neighborhood that has the most homeless children in the district, just because of where it sits in the proximity of New York Avenue and many of the family shelters, which are also hotels, that they house these children in. But thinking about and talking to these children about those experiences of, first living at DC General and now living in a hotel room where you're in a room that has 2 beds and a mini refrigerator and a bathroom, and that is now your home for an extended period of time with no place to really call your own, no place to stretch out and play, no privacy, all of those things. Those are impactful. They're impactful for the parents that have to go through it, and it's impactful for the children. And although they're in a quote unquote safe place, it still equates to trauma. Serious accidents, car fatalities, divorce is traumatic, natural disasters. Soon after I got my degree, Katrina happened. And, I often think about the children of Katrina and how their lives will never be the same, witnessing all that they had to witness, going through being completely neglected and abandoned by the government and all of that. So we talk about, and, I know there's a lot of controversy in terms of how much of it was a natural disaster, but that's another conversation for another day. But with that being said, even the fires out on the West Coast, all those things are traumatic and can impact you. Prison, thinking about children going to visit their parents in prison and what that's like to see them behind the glass walls. Being in prison is traumatic. I started my career at the federal prison system. Police conduct, torture, poverty, miscarriages, loss of a child. All of these things are traumatic experiences, but the interesting part is oftentimes we've normalized these experiences and don't even recognize how traumatic they are and how they have hurt us and impacted us. And let me touch on one more, which is poverty. So So oftentimes we don't think about poverty as a trauma because, I remember, again, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I remember it being said that, oh, we were poor when I was young. This is like my grandmother's age and my mother's age. We were poor when we were young, but we didn't even know we were poor. We didn't figure out we were poor until after we graduated from high school or went to college or whatever. But things are different now. Children that are poor, children that are living in poverty are very clear about the fact that they are living in a different way than other people live. When they go to a different side of town and see how different things are, when they turn on the TV or social media, they see that things are dramatically different. So gone are the days where we could say kids don't even know that they're poor. They don't know that their schools are not the same as other people's schools uptown, that their corner stores are not the same as other people, that their grocery stores are not the same. So being able to say poverty and the trauma that just not having enough and being food insecure brings is a really big deal. So what's trauma's role in mental illness? Next slide, please. So there's consequences of trauma. And there's a presentation I do that I actually show a picture of the brain. And just in short, one thing that we know about trauma and trauma's impact on the brain is that we've all heard about our frontal lobe or our frontal cortex. And what that part of the brain does is it's our decision making. It helps us to figure out if there's a threat of danger and all of that. But then there's a tiny little piece that's in the back of your head, back of your brain, called the amygdala. And the amygdala is your fear response system. And what happens is there's a reason that this part, the decision-making part, is really big and this other part is really small, because the big part, the decision-making, is supposed to be, that's what's supposed to lead us. But what they found with people with trauma is that amygdala, that fear response, that traumatic response, it grows because it's triggered so often. So often they have to be on edge, figuring out what to do next. And it grows and it can overshadow the work of the decision-making. So, for instance, if I'm walking down the street and I've had all these traumas, and especially if I'm a young male and I see a man that looks at me kind of funny, my automatic response is going to be, all right, he has it out for me. I need to pull out my gun or my knife and take care of this, versus, okay, the decision making, maybe he's not even looking at me at all. I don't know this guy. I'm not threatened. I'm just minding my business. So you're not going to go through all those steps. You're going to go to the trauma response and just react. And a lot of times when we talk about our young men and now young women who are having these issues, we see them reacting out of their trauma responses based on all the things they've gone through up until this point. So again, it changes your brain when you have to go through trauma, which of course is a direct impact on mental illness. Hyperreactivity, impulsivity. There's a whole lot of kids that have been diagnosed with ADHD who actually have trauma responses, and that's what's leading them to go forward. You have a negative belief about the world at large and people in general. When you dealt with trauma, limited social skills, not being able to problem solve, because again, you're always on alert, you're always reacting, so you can't do what you need to do. Externalizing behaviors, problems with authority, which again, we see nowadays is a very real thing. Development or mimicking of other psychiatric disorders, and then a preoccupation with emotional survival. So again, someone who is not trauma informed will look at these young people or older people and just say, oh my goodness, they're really messed up, versus asking the true question that needs to be asked. Next slide, please. So the true question that needs to be asked is what has happened to you to get you to this point? Because what has happened to you is now that you feel a lack of safety, you feel worry, you feel hurt, you feel fear, anger, revenge. You believe that you're a victim because you have been. You can't think about your future. What we've seen now is a lot of people who don't believe that they're going to make it past their 21st birthday or their 30th birthday. So they don't even plan their life in that way. That's kind of that whole YOLO, you only live once. So let's get it all in, because I know that my cousin's been shot. I know that my father was shot. So I don't know what's going to happen to me next. So I got to get it all in right now. And I'm living in a way that it seems like I don't care, but I've been taught not to care. So you become, and you may feel hopeless and helpless when it comes to your future. Next slide. And with that, and when you have these behaviors that are often trauma responses, that often are, kind of the result of, a developed mental illness, there's the stigma. There's stigmas that's surrounding that. Next slide. And the stigmas come from a lot of places. Our churches have made mental illness and responses to trauma, taboo and bad. Home, we're told by parents and aunts and uncles that you need to get it together and just do what you have to do to be okay. And in society, again, when you're often being told that you have to be strong, you have to figure it out, you can't show any weakness, you can't cry. All of these places make the stigmas even worse. Next slide. So, how do we break the stigma? How do we break the stigma of mental illness? How do we break the stigma of getting help? How do we break the stigma of people, especially Black people, feeling like they have to be stronger and more steadfast than anyone else? One of the first things that we need to do this to break the stigma is to recognize where that came from. Recognizing there's um, one of the chapters of a book I wrote was based on, I don't know if any of you've heard of it, but if you haven't, I would definitely suggest you looking into it. There's an author and a researcher called, her name is Dr. Joy DeGroy, and she wrote a pivotal book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And in post-traumatic slave syndrome, what she talks about is how we, especially as Black people, have decades and now centuries of trauma that has happened over and over and again, and there's been no intervention and no help. So what we've done is we passed down the trauma. So, I've been traumatized by, my circumstances, and then I have children. And because I'm still operating and I'm still learning how to cope and trying to figure it out, then I pass that trauma down to them and the things that I model in the coping, and then they pass it down to their children. And the fact, again, and that's not an indictment on us as people, because what it says is how miraculous it is that we've gone through all this trauma and still are sitting here and able to have conversations and able to figure things out despite not having the help that we've needed for years and years and years. So the first thing in breaking the stigma is to know that this is long-standing. A lot of times it's generational of the things that we've had to go through that's made us somewhat dysfunctional. But once we recognize it, then we can kind of go back to the root and start processing it to work through it. So knowing that healing is freeing, to not have self-stigma where we have to expect for ourselves to do so much better. We need to talk about the challenges we have openly. We need to choose empowerment over shame. So we need to all know that we can't live in a space of shame. We have to live in a space of change. What do we need to do to change? What do we need to empower ourselves? What do we need to empower other people? And we need to educate ourselves and others on mental health and what mental wellness looks like. Next slide. Normalize wellness. So again, we've normalized the trauma we've gone through. We've normalized these stigmas and the things that people say that we have to be. But one thing that we have to do is making sure that being well becomes a thing. So knowing that we don't have to suffer in silence, knowing it's okay to ask for help. Another extremely important piece to this is really, the same way that if I woke up this morning and I had a crook in my neck because I slept wrong, I'm going to think about, okay, I slept wrong. I need to get another pillow, or I need to make sure that I, prepare the bed correctly. But we also need to check in the mental health side. What could be the mental health reason that I had trouble sleeping? Was there a whole bunch of stuff on my mind? Was I really busy yesterday and missed some things? What is causing me to be so busy? What am I thinking about? What am I daydreaming? What's keeping me from moving forward? So the same thing that we do checks on our physical body, we need to do checks on our mental health, because every ailment that we have and everything that's going on with us has some type of mental health capacity. So we need to constantly be checking in with ourselves. Next slide. All right, and with that is question and answers. And if Reverend Jessica or whoever is designated can tell me some of the questions that I may have missed in the chat, I will respond to the one that I did see, which was about, choosing a mental health practitioner. And I would say that one thing that's extremely important is to know that you have a right to choose who you feel comfortable with. And what does that mean? The same way that if you owned a business, that you would interview and see if a person is a fit and if a person can get you to where you need to be in terms of what your mission is. That's the same way you need to interview someone that is going to be helping you with your mental health. Does this person seem like they, invested in learning more about how to help me? Is this person have time to really respond and really focus on me? Or do I feel like they're just kind of pushing people through the door? Am I picking up on energy that is positive from this person? So, knowing that you have a fit is that. And again, I went to several schools so as was mentioned, I went to Wilberforce University, small, historically Black college in the middle of Ohio, best experience ever. But then I went from Wilberforce to a consortium to get my doctorate. And that consortium, consisted of Norfolk State, Old Dominion, William and Mary, East Virginia Medical School. And I can just say the education and the things that I received at Norfolk State, which is another historically Black college, versus what I received at William and Mary was dramatically different. And the way that they approached mental health was different. And one thing that I heard at William and Mary is, hey, when you have a clinician, when you have a client, you are the expert. If they don't do what you tell them to do, then it's called resisted, and you need to challenge them on that if they're being resistant. Whereas at Norfolk State, they said, no, these people, you need to empower your own clients to come up with their own solutions. And again, that's more online to where I am. Now, some people may need somebody to come in and boss them around and tell them what to do. I just have never seen that work for anybody that I know. So you have to figure out, what is this person's style? What is this person's philosophy? Is it somebody who feels like everybody is the same and they don't see color? That's an issue. Those are kind of those key words that you're like, oh, if you don't see color, that means you don't see me, and you may not be the right fit for me. What other questions have popped up?
Thank you, Dr. Corbett. This is a good one that has come up. How do I find a therapist who can understand my culture? I've just moved here moved to the U.S. from a very complicated culture, Arab and African Muslim, and wants to make sure of cultural competency. So how do we go about engaging with a therapist who has some cultural competency and can help navigate diverse cultures?
Right. Thank you so much for that question. So one thing is that you could ask specifically, what has been your experience working with someone like me? Have you ever seen anyone from an African nation? Have you ever seen anybody? Have you been to, these places? Here's some unique, here's some ways in moving to the U.S. that I feel different. How can you help me work through that? How much do you know? So really asking them what they know and how they can help in that interviewing process would be the same. And I would say, don't stop until you find someone. There's one site that I think does a really good job, which is Psychology Today, where you can literally type in exactly what you want to see, who you want to see, location, background, and all of that. And it will pop up, those populations, those clinicians that worked exactly with those populations.
Thank you so much. And I believe you have answered all the questions from this first section. So we want to thank Dr. Streeter Corbett for her presentation and for sharing such a wealth of information with us. And I know that she has another commitment later today, so she may be able to join in audio for a little bit longer, but we're grateful that she was able to get this part of her presentation done before moving on to her other commitments. So thank you again, Dr. Corbett. Wonderful, wonderful information.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes. All righty, so we are moving right ahead, and we want to now go to our second drawing. This is the second chance to win. Once again, there will be drawing for a $50 Visa gift card, one of the Black Genius journals, a guided journal through history and affirmation. And I do just want to highlight this journal a little bit because I was able to kind of review it. It's really wonderful. It's for every day of the year, and it starts off with a great quote and a writing prompt for your young young person, as well as an opportunity for deeper learning at the end. So just an awesome gift. And then also in this drawing, there's a chance for a 60-minute session with Ascension Psychological Services. So if you are the winner of that one, you'll be able to choose between either a goal setting session, a digital vision boarding session, or a couples relationship skills workshop. So that's very exciting. So let us announce the winners of this second round of gifts. Reverend Carey, who is the lucky winner of the $50 Visa gift card? Oh, you got to unmute yourself. There we go.
For our $50 gift card, our winner is Patricia Jackson Washington. Again,
right.
Patricia Jackson Washington.
Wonderful. Patricia, congratulations. All right. And the winner of our Black Genius Journal.
Okay, it's spinning. It's a randomized draw. We have nothing to do with it. And the winner is James Robinson.
James
Robinson.
All right, congratulations. And then the winner of the 60-minute session with Ascensions.
The winner of the 60-minute session the name is coming across as Joyce, and then it has 814-034-69704. So it has the first name and the last name as a number. So I'm just going to say Joyce is the winner of our 60-minute session.
Okay. Thank you so much. So to all of those individuals, we will be contacting you via email later this afternoon to let you know how to access these wonderful prizes. Thank you so much. All righty. So moving on, as we prepare to get ready for our second topic, this is a very important one. Now that we've kind of, talked about dismantling the myths and helping to normalize wellness and the importance of seeking support. Now we want to get into how do we become better equipped to know how to assess when things may not be quite the way they should be, and how do we move forward. So we're going to try to do our Menti poll. We weren't able to do the first one because the time got away from us a little bit. But what we're going to do, this next slide here, we're going to invite you, if you're able, if you're on a computer, laptop or desktop, you should be able to open up a new browser. And if you could go to menti.com website, just type in menti.com in a new browser, and then enter the code 647-15083. And I think at the same time, Reverend Carey is going to log into the Mentimeter website, and I can, are you able to share along with me, Reverend Carey, or do I need to stop sharing mine so that folks can see that?
You will have to stop sharing.
Okay, let me do that now. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing so that Reverend Carey can share his screen. He's going to open up the Menti screen so that we will, there you go. So when you go into menti.com, type in menti.com, and you just, when asked, use the code 647-15083, you'll be able to respond to this question. What are some of the negative things you have heard regarding mental health diagnosis or treatment? And you can select up to three words, and this will create a wordle for us to begin to see how some of the, oh, this is the first one, Reverend Carey. Yeah, okay, go ahead. Yes. Some of the negative words that have sometimes come up about that. So we've already seen some of those negative things: crazy, disturbed, genetic. So these are some of those myths that we had just talked about that that we know sometimes impact folks from engaging in the mental health treatment that is so often needed. Here's some more: weak, untreatable, unnecessary. Those are sometimes the things. Sick. Weakness, White. So sometimes we think it doesn't relate to Black people, and then there's Black. Yeah, white and Black or Black and white. What else do we have? Crazy is getting larger. So there are a lot of folks who are identifying with that. Disturbed, evil, sick. Nothing is wrong with me, too expensive, need to pray more, untreatable, right? So all of these are some of the myths or things associated with it that sometimes keep us from accessing the mental health. So these are great. These are great examples. Broken, I see that in there as well. Touch, simple, so these are all the things that we have potentially had said to us or we've thought about. Now, this next one, I think if you advance the screen, Reverend Carey, there's a second poll that speaks about our self-assessment. So that's really the one we want for this one. If we can stop that one and go to that second poll, that's going to allow us to self-assess ways that stress has impacted us in the past year. Because we recognize as human beings, all of us have had stressors, and sometimes there are things happening in our body that we're not even aware of. And sometimes just being able to normalize and identify what's going on can be the first step of assessing our wellness and to know when it might be good to get some support. So Reverend Carey, if you're able to go back in to that presentation where you just were and select that second question, that'll give the participants a chance to do a little survey on any of the stressors that they have engaged in. There you go. So now if you go back to menti.com and use the code 647, there we go. Folks are already doing it. Excellent. So some of the things that could have occurred that are stress related, feelings of worry, feelings of anxiety or anger, sadness, changes in appetite, changes in energy level or interest, difficulty sleeping, physical reactions. So you see across the board, many of us have experienced this. And the reason we wanted to have this exercise was to help us to know that as human beings, to some degree, mental health is for everyone. It's about all of us.
Leaving until you're actually talking.
Learning how to self-assess and become more aware. So just as you look at the bar graph, you can see just in this past year, all of us have been touched by something, some to more degree than others, but you see the importance of knowing where we are at any moment on this spectrum of wellness. So thank you all for participating in that. So we can close out of that, and then I will get our presentation back up. Thank you, Reverend Carey, for that. Okay, so here we go. So now that we've gone through our Menti poll, we are now going to invite our panelists back to walk us through this conversation about mental health assessment and self-care practices. Just make sure you unmute there you go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Michelle, and I will be presenting on areas to assess and self-care. So I often get a question, how do I know that something isn't going well, or, how do I know that I need additional support? And so there are some areas that I like to tell clients to pay attention to. So as Satara mentioned in her presentation, changing to eating or sleeping habits, like your career and academic functioning. If you notice that you're missing classes and this is not your normal, or you're late to all of your meetings and this is not your normal, it may be helpful to slow down and kind of do a check-in to see what other things are going on that may be impacting your functioning.
You're muted, Dr. Haywood. I'm sorry. There you go.
I just muted myself. Sorry. Next slide, please. So just some signs and symptoms, and Dr. Streeter talked about this in her presentation. So changes in your daily routine, if you're having thoughts, excessive thoughts around a specific topic or incident that just keeps running through your mind. If you find yourself, you're normally a social and outgoing person and you are isolated and not talking to friends and counseling engagements and appointments. Those are some signs and symptoms that it may be something going on that you're not aware of. I think it's also important to remember that when we have something going on emotionally, this can impact our somatic system. So our body will show signs that something is going on. Oftentimes with children, it's stomach aches. They'll complain about stomach aches. That's usually the first indicator of anxiety or issues that there's something happening at school. So it's also important to pay attention to the body and how the body responds. Generally, what I found with clients is there's usually a disconnect between the head and the body. And so they aren't aware of the signs that their body is telling them that something is wrong. But the body is usually the first indicator that you're having challenges. Next slide, please. So one way that has come about in the last year or two for Black and brown people to check in is, you good, sis? You good, bro? So mental health, as mentioned in the previous presentation, has always carried this stigma. The stigma that you shouldn't go to therapy, and Black people don't talk about the problems, and what happens in the house should stay in the house. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is normalize checking in with your friends and checking in with your family and making sure that people have a safe space to say, no, I'm not okay. I actually need some support. I need some help. So there's a podcast, and their whole concept is ways to help you check in with your peers, or ways to check in with men. Oftentimes men don't want to talk about how they feel. So it's literally as simple as saying, you good, sis? What can I help you with? What do you need? You good, bro? I noticed that you haven't been coming around lately. So it's just a way to encourage honesty about not being okay. Next slide. And so this is just a model, and this does not capture everyone's experience, and it might not capture all of the symptoms, but it's a continuum that just kind of displays some of the symptoms that someone might experience and the different level of care or support that they need. So as you notice on my left, it says healthy, and it's in the green area. But as you move to the other end of the model, and you start having, anxiety and pervasive sadness, or the anxiety increases, unable to perform duties. So the more acute the problem is, the greater the likelihood that you need to seek out and reach additional support. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite topics, and Dr. Streeter mentioned this in her presentation and encouraged everybody to go out and enjoy the sun. Self-care, self-care, self-care. I cannot stress enough how important self-care is. We often, especially Black women, have this notion that self-care is selfish. I think people actually have this notion that self-care is selfish. We take care of everyone else. We take care of everyone else's needs, and the children and family and work. And oftentimes ourselves, we get neglected. So I believe that self-care should be a holistic process, mind, body, and soul. And the idea of this is doing things to take care of you. Self-care is important because it can help buffer the difficult days, the difficult moments, the days when everything goes wrong, or it feels like, you're hit with one problem after another. Self-care is there to kind of add that balance and that buffer. Next slide. So self-care does not have to be a long process. It can be as simple as taking a moment and listening to a song you like, making your bed. For me, I love when my bed is made. That to me is self-care. Doodling. If you need to throw things out, throwing things out actually feels really good. These are just some examples, but feel free to create a list that works for you. It doesn't have to be going to get a massage or a pedicure, or going for a long hike. It can be the small things that make your heart happy and make you smile. Next slide, please. So practicing self-care. So again, self-care is a holistic process. So one of the things that I really like to target, especially with the young people, is social media. Social media is not real life. It is not an accurate representation of what's going on in people's real world. And so if there are things that you read or that you see on social media, it can influence your whole day. So I'm a big advocate of, if there are people on social media that you need to block or unfollow, don't hesitate to do that. These are, again, just examples of self-care: taking a walk, taking a 5-minute time out, burning a candle using a certain body oil, starting a gratitude jar and writing down the things that you're grateful for, or taking a moment to just say thank you for the things that went well in spite of maybe the difficulties that you experienced. Next slide, please. So self-care activities. Again, these are other self-care activities, and pets, I want to point that out. Even something like a plant can be a self-care activity, gardening, or getting a cactus and just watching it change. So there is a range of things that you can do around self-care. Next slide. And so I think it's helpful to have a mental wellness plan. And what I would encourage people to do is to create the mental wellness plan when you are feeling well, so that when on those days where you're having difficult moments or not feeling your best, you're able to look at this card or look at this, piece of paper that you wrote things down on, and be able to reference that to help you see what you might need to do to get on track. So again, if there's a friend that you can always call, or if there is a certain hotline that you've used in the past, having that information ready so that you can easily access it in a moment of difficulty. It's also incredibly important to make sure that there is balance in your life, whether that is with food, whether that's with exercise, whether that's with alone time. Balance is extremely helpful, and creating that balance in every area will help overall well-being. Next slide. So tools for your toolbox. So I will go through these and I will just point out the Heart Smile list. So the Heart Smile list is a list that you can make, and it just has a number of things that you like to do that will make you smile or make you happy. And these can be in any area or category. I mentioned the gratitude jar, yoga and exercise. So things that get you moving. It's proven that exercise helps the brain and it helps the body. A coping card. So a coping card is just an index or a post-it note where you write your tools down on so that you can easily access them in a difficult moment. And whether that is, I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm going to burn this candle, or whatever that song might be that you can put on, and no matter how many times you hear it, it just takes you to a different, more positive place. Next slide. So Q&A, and I saw that there were some questions in the chat, so I will go to those.
So while you're doing that, Reverend Haywood, I want to start with the ones in the Q&A that have come through. There are two questions specifically about the emotional budget. There's a request to explain that in a little greater detail. What is an emotional budget, and how would you explain that?
Yeah, so I see the questions: what is an emotional budget, and what is PTSD, and can teenagers experience PTSD? So anyone can experience PTSD. So Dr. Streeter mentioned trauma, and so I like to think of it as trauma with a big T, which might be a terrible car accident, or 9/11 would be a trauma. A mass shooting would be a trauma with a big T, but I also describe trauma with a small t. So for example, if someone was bit by a dog, they might not see that it's completely life-changing, but it's traumatic for them. And so anyone who experiences a trauma can suffer from PTSD if that trauma is not addressed. If they're not given the opportunity to talk about it, to be able to say, this is how it's bothering me, these are the thoughts I'm having, these are my fears or worries. So anybody can experience PTSD as a result of a trauma. So when we think of an emotional budget, one of the words that comes to mind is boundaries. So being able to set your boundaries around how much you're able to give and what you're taking in. So if there's someone who is negative, and you notice that every time you say something that they're negative, that may be a place where you set your boundary, and you are mindful of how much time you can engage with them, or how much time you all spend together, or if you actually even want to keep that person in your life. Boundaries allow you to know what you need, and they also keep you safe. It can be very hard setting boundaries, but in order to be able to maintain your self-care and to be able to maintain your own emotional wellness, it's important to be mindful of everything that you're giving out in your interactions with others and everything that you're taking in.
Thank you. There's also here this comment about the recognition of knowing the symptoms, but I guess the challenges of accessing, and this may come up in the next topic when it speaks more about children, knowing and seeing some of the symptoms in our children, but with everyday living in life, things become, I guess, overwhelming, and it seems like we fall into a deeper cycle. So that may perhaps be addressed later. It says, even when I stop to think, I will be thinking about all of the issues that I already have, what makes it worse. So I guess maybe guidance on how to compartmentalize and manage what we're seeing and how to access services.
Yeah, and that will be discussed a little bit more in the panel in the next part of the presentation. And I don't think it's easy at all, but I think right now all of America is overwhelmed. Parents, kids, everybody is incredibly stressed out. And I'm a systems clinician, and one of the things that I like to say is like, how can we take some stress off the system? What needs to let go? What needs to change? And so it might require a complete sit down of the whole family. Like, we can't work on, we're going to take this out so that we can take some strain out of the system, or we're going to start doing this together so that we all bear the responsibility of it. I also think that, it sounds like what that person is describing is anxiety. And oftentimes anxiety makes us avoid. It is overwhelming. And being able to ask for help and say that you need help is incredibly important, to learn skills to be able to manage thinking and learn the tools to be able to manage how you engage, and learn that, okay, I need to not internalize certain experience. So again, therapy is not just because something is wrong, but it's also to help strengthen your growth areas and to help teach you how to manage very difficult day-to-day situations.
Thank you. And then this last question, how is mental health services administered to a community of people versus one-on-one therapy? And this kind of connects to something that came up in the chat. As African Americans experiencing microaggressions and, racial injustice, it creates its own set of trauma. So some of this perhaps needs to be a community-based approach. And is that possible or feasible as opposed to just one-on-one when a whole community is impacted because of traumas?
Absolutely. And I think what we're doing right now is part of the community-based approach. We're talking about it. We gave people a free resource to be able to come and learn information. Other formats, there are groups. So there are clinicians who offer groups. But I think one of the best ways that we can make the community healthier is to actually have these conversations. Talk about the things that are burdening your family, or the things that you've noticed that really didn't quite work well with you as a child, and start having those conversations, and breaking some of the secrecy and the silence around challenges, so that we can be open about the need to make changes and the need to grow stronger and healthier as a community.
Very good. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of those who have been submitting your questions. We're doing our best to ensure that they're getting answered. There was one specific question that I think spoke to some resources, which we will be covering at the end of today's session. Just to let everyone know, all of the slides that you're seeing will be emailed to everyone who registered for this event. So you'll have the complete slide deck, as well as all of the resource that have been a part of this for ongoing usage for you. So we're going to, and keep your questions coming, because even if we're not able to get to them now, we will have another question and answer period towards the end of today's session. But we want to thank Reverend Haywood. Sorry, not Reverend, Dr. Haywood. And we want to thank her for her presentation and helping us to learn a little bit more about how to do our own self-assessment and develop a toolbox and a toolkit for self-care. So we're now ready for our third drawing. We have more gifts to give away. And again, we are giving away another $50 Visa gift card, another copy of the Black Genius Guided Journal, and another 60-minute session with Ascensions Psychological psychological services. So Reverend Carey is going to assist and let us know who is the lucky winner of the gift card this go round.
Okay, our randomized drawing is spinning. And our winner is Grace from Fort Washington.
All
I
right.
don't know if that's a church or is that a person. Grace from Fort Washington, can you please, well, we'll reach out to you to make sure we get your information. I think it's a church, but Grace from Fort Washington.
Is the winner of the $50 gift card. Very good. Congratulations. And the winner of our journal
Spinning, it's spinning. Clara Jackson.
Clara Jackson. Congratulations.
Clara Jackson.
All right, excellent. And then Ascension's session, 60-minute session.
Okay, here we go. Brenda McIlwain, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Brenda McIlwain is the winner.
All right. Congratulations to all of you, and we will make sure that we are in touch with you so via email so that you will be able to claim your prizes. All right, excellent. So we're going to move ahead to our next topic, which has to do with more kind of specialized services. So we're going to be, or our panelists are going to be talking about services to our children and adolescents, as well as serving Black men, so Black mental health. So we are going to invite our panelists back to lead us through this next conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Reverend. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Opuka, and thank you so much for this opportunity. With May being the Mental Health Awareness Month, I almost feel like we need to have every month be a Mental Health Awareness Month. So we'll make it happen one way or other, and this is the beginning. Children and adolescents, that's where my heart is. I mainly pretty much work with our little ones who are a joy to work with. And at the same time, I always share this with the folks that I work with, that children tell us what's going on through their behaviors. They're always either asking for something or telling us something. And so even in the clinical setting, when we start the work of healing, I always say that we are just part of the village. We are here to partner with our parents, our caregivers, as Dr. Streeter and Dr. Haywood have already mentioned, that healing starts with one person. However, as we try to touch the different hearts as one by one with our babies, you guys are the experts. The adults who are with them day in and day out are the experts, and we are just part of the village. So always that is my beginning spiel, and always have to remind the different people that I work with that we are here as part of the village. Like we know, it takes a village to raise a child. We can start off with the slides. In terms of the stresses and the challenges, just thinking of COVID, the pandemic, what has that triggered? And as my colleagues have already mentioned, you got to think of, when you look at an individual, you think of the body, the mind, and the spirit. You can't take one without the other. So if one part is affected, we're going to see the other parts also, the body being affected. And what does that look like in a day-to-day? Dr. Streeter mentioned about how the brain works, the frontal lobe, which is problem solving, and then we have Amy G, who's the amygdala at the back, that's smaller. The Amy G is where you find when there's some trigger with the stressors, our babies are either going to be on flight mode, fight mode, or freeze mode. So the question is, what does that look like in those different settings, depending on how an individual will respond? And, you know, a 20-minute conversation is not going to cut it for us today. I would love for us to be able to have some more time to discuss this, but just a touch of little bits and pieces, and hopefully we'll get opportunities to be able to speak some more about the different areas of how the manifestation looks like, different developmental ages, because it looks so different for different babies. From early childhood, my 3-year-olds will express themselves so totally different from the elementary school to the adolescents, middle school, and then high school. So it all looks very different, but there's always an overlying theme, something's going on. And so the question becomes, what is going on? Remember, we're already predisposed one way or the other, whether it's biological, whether it's environmental. With COVID, we've had eviction, loss of employment. We have some of our babies who don't have a home anymore, transient. Now that they had a home before, they probably already were transient, but now things have gone to a different level. So as their triggers occurs, things are also going to look magnified at this point. So we look at their academics and grades, what's going on at school. Working the school system currently, we've had a lot of reports where most of our caregivers are saying, my baby doesn't know how to read, or my baby needs a lot of one-on-one support, or they can't seem to remember. So there's a lot going on, and our job is to empower our parents to reach out and lean in. When it doesn't look right, we'll say something. Peer pressure. We have a lot of our babies who are withdrawing and probably leaning more towards their peers who may be dealing also with difficulties and handling that differently. Or it could be sports. They no longer want to do what they enjoyed before, looking at themselves differently. What is wrong with me? We're seeing relationships looking very tricky in terms of, from just the regular family one-on-one relationship. We've been closed in for 13 months. You have nowhere else to go but in each other's space. What may not have been evident before is not evident because we're all in this space 24/7. Next slide. So going back to knowing the signs, one of the main things that I always encourage the folks that work with our babies is, when we see something, it's good to acknowledge it, but we got to ask, what is the severity? What is the intensity? And what is the frequency? Because that's what helps guide to figure out, is this normal or is this atypical? We have healthy stress, for example, first day in school, but then we also have what we call toxic stress. And our babies they always let us know what is going on. So there could be excessive crying, especially with the younger ones. We have they're wetting the bed. Excessive worrying, and I say excessive because worrying can be okay, but to a certain extent, that is a problem. We have what may look like acting out or aggressive behaviors. And again, what does that look like? And I always ask for more information, because especially with our young ones, I serve a low socioeconomic community where the different people serving our babies may not look like the babies they're serving. So what they may say or may do may look aggressive, but is that being really aggressive? And is it excessive? So just knowing how to asking, I always say just communicate and ask. In terms of patterns of eating and sleeping, I have babies now who they love to stay all night long, but then during the day when they're supposed to log in for virtual learning, which is a new thing for all of us, then they're having difficulty staying up, which means they're not well rested, they're not available for learning, they're not able to socialize like they did before. So there's so many dynamics going on there. But at the same token, what has happened really with the pandemic and everything else going on, we have a major change in routines and schedules, which will impact their sleeping, the eating. So what are the signs? And these are the signs that we're saying, just be on the lookout for them. The next slide, please. Poor school performance or avoiding school. We've had some of our babies who, when they're in the building, we thought they didn't want to be there. But now that we are virtual, they seem to be excelling and doing so much better because they don't have to interact with other folks. But we also have a population that it's an opposite reaction to being away from the face-to-face. I'm a hands-on learner, so the screen has been a learning process. So can I imagine a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, or let be a 3-year-old first-time school experience, and here we are on virtual learning. The experience is that the best positive experience to introduce them to that space? Maybe yes, maybe no, but it does set the ground for what's to come next. Difficulty with attention and concentration. We've had a overdiagnosis of different disorders now that are looking like maybe ADHD, but that could also be mimicked as anxiety, because when you can't remember, you can't stay focused, it may look like one or the other. But in our space, we're very much about, no matter what you want to call it, we still need to deal with what is not looking right or feeling right. You could call it X, Y, Z, that's fine. But at the end of the day, the label is not really what counts. It's us addressing what we're feeling, seeing, and doing. Goes back again to the avoidance of activities. We have Dr. Haywood spoke about some somatic symptoms like headaches. The body goes back to the body, mind, and spirit. They're all combined. When one is off, the other will be off. We have with our youth, there's been the use of alcohol, drugs. Adults, we're seeing it too. However, our little ones are finding different ways to start coping. And so the question becomes, what is a healthy coping strategy and what is an unhealthy coping strategy? Next slide, please. And so for the parents, it goes back to, like I said, in therapy, we are all about creating that culturally safe space. But being that we've been virtual, we've been doing more so supports virtually, which is very different from having somebody sitting next to you. I'm on the floor with our little ones working, doing different things. It looks very different. And we always say our caregivers are the ears and the eyes. Just be aware of what's going on, creating that safe space to be able to share. Culturally, one of the things we've been raised to keep what goes in the house stays in the house. We don't talk about feelings, a fear of being called crazy or weak. That makes it difficult to even have those honest conversations with our children, our grandchildren. So how do we as adults start opening up some more in order to break, again, those generational cycles that we are talking about, to help our little ones be able to open up, because they feed off of our energy. When we are anxious, they are getting it. They are anxious. And I truly believe this is even in the womb. They can feel that spirit and energy. Go to therapy. What does that look like? I think just first of all, acknowledging something is not right or it doesn't seem or feel right is the first step. So it's always a celebration when we have somebody extend themselves and so that they're ready for therapy. Being mindful of unhealthy generational patterns just goes back to what is normal to us, what's been comfortable, speaking up, expressing, talking about our feelings. How do we do that and how do we break that? And I believe it always starts from self. Utilizing appropriate resources, which we'll talk about at the end with the different resources we have. Being the model of the behavior we want to teach. I have a lot of parents who say, but he's always yelling out, he doesn't listen. But then as they're walking down the hallway, you hear mom or dad doing the exact opposite. And we wonder, well, how do we expect them to do the right thing if we're modeling the opposite? So I always say, again, we are their first teacher, we are the model. They get a lot of it from us, and it's both the positive and the negative. Encouraging emotional expression, it's a work in progress. But again, it goes back to just letting it out. Like we said, it is okay to be okay. So it is okay to ask for help. And then children respond to the energy of the environment. Going back to, again, it's that safe space. They feed off of our energy. Next slide, please. So what can I do to support my child? The laundry list can seem long, can seem overwhelming, because we are also already carrying our own stuff and trying to maintain for our babies. who rely on us and lean on us. So who do we lean on? And goes back to the therapy that we're speaking to, or just finding healthy ways of coping. But establishing and maintaining routines is very much one way to help support our babies. Like I stated, the community I work in, we have a lot of gun violence. There's a lot of shooting. So the second, third hand, first hand trauma experiences day in, day out. And then we have the schools closed and our kids, we haven't seen our kids in the 13 months. The safest space for them was our school buildings, but now we have them, they're at home, and we know they're dealing with what is going on as a day-to-day occurrence, but yet we expect them to be typical, normal kids walking around. It's difficult to do that. But if we can help with maintaining routines, which helps predictability, and it also just helps releases that anxiety within, helps release AMG, the amygdala, in terms of just knowing you're not always on fight mode or fright mode. It's very helpful. Ask questions to determine emotional state. It's okay to ask your baby if everything is okay, or figure out a way to ask or explore it, and validate their feelings. They may say they feel a certain way. We may not understand what it is, but all they need to hear is, okay, I hear you, you feel sad today, or you don't want to go outside today. Providing age-appropriate answers depending on if it's your 3-year-old or your 18-year-old. And teaching coping strategies goes back to the modeling. Encourage a support system, talking to the school, reaching out to either the social worker in your school, your baby's school, or the counselor, or it could be even a teacher who you feel comfortable with, and reaching out and say, I noticed this, I'm not sure if it's okay. And a lot of the times I'll have parents say, I don't know if I'm overreacting. Well, if you're overreacting, that's fine. But the good thing is you said something, so we're all aware. Be on the lookout. Let's see what's going on. Next slide. And so things to avoid is minimizing statements like, we've had a lot of loss, grief, and we're normally quick to say, well, yeah, when I was your age, this is what happened, so you'll be fine. It's no big deal. We're minimizing, what is going on. Goes back to validating and acknowledge how they're feeling or what may be going on. And everybody's healing process looks very different. The same as the impact of trauma looks very different for each individual. So just know your baby, and we can all figure out what would work for them or not work for them. Predicting a time frame for their feelings. It could be a week and you notice, what, you've been in your room all week. What's going on? But if it's a baby who's always, an introvert and prefers to be on the computer most of the time, maybe it's time for you to check in more often with them. Hey, we're going for a walk. You coming with us? And maybe that could be the way for you to stick in your head and make sure they're breathing and everything is okay. Being dishonest, it's okay to say you're unsure rather than give the wrong or inaccurate information. And then we also have the language we use, the way we behave around our young ones, just being more cognizant with that. Next slide. And so that's pretty much, like I said, 20 minutes is just a taste to talking about it. But in terms of when we look at the developmental lifespan of our babies, they're constantly growing, they continue to grow. So it's a longer and deeper conversation, but that's pretty much what I have to share with the children. And I'll hand over the mic to my colleague, Dr. Haywood, on the male mental health.
Thank you. And so one of the reasons that we wanted to highlight male mental health as a specialty area is because men are often left out of the conversation around mental health. And you can go to the next slide. So I think it's important to make sure that we recognize that men are impacted by mental health and they have mental health challenges. One of the things in my research and work with men is just the suicide rates among Black boys and Black men is incredibly high, and it's at times seems a little bit discouraging. And so I have widened my therapeutic focus to try to do more programming and more work around male mental health. So I thought it would be great to just highlight some of the areas that make it challenging. I won't go through the statistics. You all have been able to read them as I talked through them. So if we can go to the next slide. So one of the phrases that you all might have heard is toxic masculinity. And so this is this idea of what being a man or being male should be about. And oftentimes these toxic thoughts or beliefs really impact men from getting the support that they need. So they have a harder time establishing social connection. So a woman can walk up to another woman in the bathroom and say, "Oh, your shoes are cute." Make conversation, and next thing they know, they're brunching together, or working out together. Men may not be that open around trying to get social support or establish those social connections. The pressure on men is to always hold it together, to be strong, to present as if they have it together. They're supposed to be the backbone of the family, and I think that the idea of working together and being a village, we've kind of gotten away from that notion, and it has put a lot of pressure on men to present a certain way. Men also, because of this notion that they're supposed to be able to manage everything and have everything together, they struggle with asking for help. There's often this belief that asking for help is a sign of weakness, and no one wants to appear weak. And one of the things that I like to encourage the men that I work with is that asking for help is a sign of courage and bravery, and that goes for anybody who reaches out and asks for help. Other thoughts are of toxic masculinity, that they should just be strong and quiet. So again, if you're supposed to be quiet, then that means you shouldn't say, "Well, hey, this is bothering me," or "This is difficult for me." So again, I think that's a myth that really places them in a deficit, and it inhibits them from being able to get the support that they need. They worry about showing vulnerability. It's hard for anyone to be vulnerable and to say, "I need help," or "I'm struggling," or "This is difficult." But there's also this social expectation that women can be vulnerable, but men shouldn't or can't be vulnerable. And so one of the things that we have to do, and one of the things that I strive to do in mental health, is to encourage just being normal and being a human. And part of being human is being vulnerable. Believe they should be tough enough to fix it all, and fix their own problems. And that's just not realistic. We go to the dentist for help with our teeth. We go to a mechanic for help with our car. We go to doctors for help with our mind and body. And so we have to normalize that going to someone for help is a part of how you take care of yourself. Next slide. So then we have additional obstacles for our Black and brown men. So whether that's violence, there are cultural norms in a lot of communities that do not promote mental health. And I get this question all the time. I work with Indian clients and African clients, and what they'll say is, in our culture, we don't do this. We don't ask for help. And so one of the things that I wanted to just normalize is that there are indeed in every culture some norms that we have been taught, or that we have ingrained with us, and that's based off of the whole community. But some of those norms aren't healthy for the individual person, and many times they aren't healthy for the community. And so what I like to encourage them to do is to look at where there can be some flexibility in that norm, and what they need individually. So, if your culture doesn't promote going to therapy or asking for help, does that work with you individually, as an African male or as a Hispanic male? And what can you do, and what do you need to be healthier? Next slide, please. So again, my goal is changing the narrative. And one of the things that we have to do is to encourage Black boys and Black men to get help. As our Black men talk about their challenges and struggles, then they'll teach their boys to talk about their challenges and struggles. And that's one way that we can continue to break the cycle. As Dr. Apuka mentioned, kids pay attention to what's modeled for them. And so we have to start modeling and normalizing asking for help and getting help and speaking up about challenges.
You're muted, Dr. Haywood.
I realize that it does that every time I hit enter when I think I'm changing the slide. Sorry about that. So we need better mental health education. So programs like this, and not just during Mental Health Awareness Month, but throughout the year, mental health is something that we should make as common as going to the doctor, or as common as taking our car to the mechanic. It's also important to disrupt how people, especially men, think about mental health. We are changing the stigma as we talk about mental health as a normal part of being healthy, and we have to continue to change that narrative. I think it's important that we see the body as one whole, and so it's not just health and mental health, but it's everybody. It's our health together. Like, we can't be healthy if our finger is not well, or if our arm is broken, we're not dealing with it. If there are emotional challenges that we're not addressing, then we're not healthy. We're not healthy at all in totality. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I have tried to promote to Black men is Men Care Monday. So women, we often hear the term self-care, and it's really men kind of take their self out of it because they're like, oh, that's something that women do. But self-care is something that people do. There should be self-care for kids. There should be self-care for men and women. Self-care is not a gender thing, it's a people thing. And so I started this idea of Men Care Monday, where men can really just take their time to focus on them and what they need. And maybe this would be a small step into them being able to say, okay, today I'm going to listen to this track list, or I'm going to talk to this brother and tell him how I'm feeling. But it's just a way to get the idea of taking care of their themselves off the ground. Next slide. And thank you all for your engagement and time in today's presentation. The questions have been great.
Thank you. So I'm going to start, I think, for the most recent one since our last session. A question comes in and says, what are some strategies to help transition young people back into in-person settings? That's a great one. As a parent, I want my daughter to be comfortable establishing her boundaries for personal space and continued physical distancing and safe practices for engagement, including mask wearing, washing hands. So as we're now beginning to see more conversations about transitioning back to in-person, how can parents help their young people navigate that? Dr. Apuka, do you want to?
Sure, I definitely could chime into that one. It goes back to the communication and talking about it. So one of the things we've been saying is start talking about the possibilities. We'll be going back to school, and this is it's going to look like, or it's not going to look like. And also hoping that the school is communicating what the procedures and what that will look like. So one of the things I will say is partnering with the school to know what is the protocol, what is that going to look like. So when you're having the conversations with your baby, at least we're all being consistent and saying the same thing, but our babies are also they do much better with predictability and knowing what to expect. So if you say one thing, but then they go to school and something else is going on, or vice versa, that could be a trigger in itself. But also getting a pulse of where they are with what has happened so far, I think is also another thing. So it goes back to that communication piece and ongoing conversations, but also doing things together in terms of the planning. So depending on the age, and I'm not sure how old this particular baby would be, but what we've been doing is having town hall meetings with our families. So depending on what's being shared with the school community, I think it would be easier to have those conversations with our kids at home. But then also, what I've noticed is we have sort of kind of been on the go with what's going on, and our antennas are so high with everything else going on alert that I think we also need to acknowledge where we've come from and what that looks different. And then also maybe going back to where it was before we even had the pandemic, to what happened through the pandemic. And that's what we're hoping to see when we are post the pandemic, if there's any post-pandemic at this point.
Right. Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you. And then the other question is, speaking specifically to the faith communities, what can churches do to continue to promote ongoing mental health and hygiene and beyond summits like this? We know that this is a first step, but on a more regular basis, how can churches support children in the community? Perhaps they're connected to the church via media programs, but they may not be attenders, worship attenders. So what may be some ways that churches could work together to support the children that are in the greater community in their mental health?
I can chime in with that one too. I would definitely say like what we've just had this morning is an excellent way to get it started. But I'm also thinking of partnerships. If we could partner with our faith communities, with our school communities also, I think because that's one part that is sort of, we are all working the eggshells of how do we do this. So I'm thinking of mental health providers in the community would definitely be a touch point. We have different collaboratives in the area and trying to figure out what we're speaking about the mental health, but how do we connect that not just beyond, just in the community, but at school and also in our churches and our worship settings. So I think it goes back to partnerships. The question is, where do we start and how do we do it? So it's definitely an ongoing, I would say it's an ongoing process, especially as it relates to the young ones. And then also depending on what has gone on, like we have so many, the anxiety and depression and suicidal cases are so high at this point that everybody's more on just adapting to what has happened and not even yet ready to tap into how do I even get through what I just did.
Right. So it sounds like there's going to be a season of really kind of healing and readjustment, right? Coming out of all of this, right? Very good. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for those responses. Thank you for all of those who participated in the questions. We're running a little behind, but I want to present this last segment on mental health resources because that's important, and all of these will be shared via email. And then we're asking you to please stay on the line for our final drawing, which is at the end. So there's one more chance to win. We want to just remind all of those who have won thus far. Reverend Carey has placed in the chat his email address. Please send a quick email to Reverend Carey. It's Reverend C. James jr@yahoo.com, Reverend C. James jr@yahoo.com. That way we can confirm the address, your email address, and then later you will be contacted with your prize. All right, so now that we've moved through that Q&A, we're going to talk about assessing, how do we assess mental health resources, and I'll invite Dr. Opuka and Dr. Haywood to jump in at any point if there's additional information. They were so kind to share a lot of information about general resourcing. So we just want to remind all of us that there are a vast number of helpers and healers that we have access to. So those could be psychologists or psychiatrists, which are medical doctors, social workers, peer-led support groups. There may be individuals in our life that we consider a mentor or someone that we trust, as well as our spiritual leaders. So all of those individuals can assist us in getting the help we need. Then there are a list of resources. We always know that if we're in immediate crisis and someone is in danger of hurting themselves, we want to encourage you to please call 911. There is also the Children's National Medical Center. They are located in Washington, D.C., and they are specifically designed to really meet the needs and the developmental and psychiatric needs of our children and our adolescents. So you see their inpatient admissions number, but also if there's a critical need and a crisis that's occurring, you can walk into their emergency room, and the address is listed there and will be included in your email. Psychiatric Institute of Washington, you see that they also provide inpatient services. Sometimes there's a need for assessment and for a safe space where the young person can really get the support and help that they need and develop a plan for wellness as they move back into the greater community. And so their information is there. This next one, CHAMPS, I think is a great resource because this is the Children and Adolescent Mobile Psychiatric Unit, which means that they make themselves available to go into the community. And as you can see, their staff is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and there is no charge to the family for services. So that is a wonderful resource. Sometimes there's just a need to have access to someone, and maybe transportation is an issue. And so being able to have a service to come to you, to provide assessment, support, and treatment. So that intake number is there and will be included in the resources that we send to you. There's also the crisis hotline number. This is an opportunity to connect with someone, to kind of talk through a situation of what's been happening, and then maybe be assisted to get the resources. What would be the next best step? What should I do? Where should I go next? This is what's happening. You can describe what's going on and the challenges you've been having, and then kind of be triaged or connected to the appropriate service. The Went Center for Loss and Healing, we recognize that there has been so much grief and loss that we've experienced as a community. And so this service provides those supportive services. Private insurance is accepted as well as Medicaid. And then the address to their Southeast office is listed as well as their intake number. There's another helpline here, which is a gateway. Oops, sorry, I went back too far, which is another gateway to accessing mental health services. So what you would do is tell them what your needs are, and then they can point you in the right direction. They can also help you navigate when it comes to the type of insurance that you carry. They can kind of help to connect you based on what insurance provider you have. It is recommended that if you have a private insurance, that you would contact the number on the back of your card first and ask for mental health resources that are covered. The other are important websites and hotline numbers. We heard Dr. Streeter-Corbett talk about psychology today earlier. There's also therapyforblackgirls.com. Oftentimes there is a desire to connect with a therapist of color or someone who you feel has the experience of working in a diverse population, cross-cultural population. And so these website search engines, you can actually type in if you're specifically looking for a male therapist or a female therapist, or someone who maybe has another language that they speak, or cultural sensitivity. That can be very helpful to making you feel comfortable with your search. Also, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is always available whenever there may be thoughts or concerns about self-harm or suicidal ideation. And then, of course, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration hotline for services about helping someone who may be experiencing a challenge with substance use or substance use disorders. And so next, we wanted to highlight a few of the services that are right in the community east of the river. We know that that was an important part of today's conversation. And so one of them is the MBI Health Services, LLC. They're located right on, well, they have an office, I should say, right on Minnesota Avenue. And their website is listed here, mbihs.com. They have a wide variety of services. So there wasn't enough room on the slide to list everything, but they definitely have a freestanding mental health clinic that is available. They accept DC Medicaid recipients, and those recipients are eligible for all services as well as other insurances and private pay options. So these are just some of the things that are available. They do assessments, they provide individual and family services, group therapy. There are programming for children and youth and adolescents. There is even some employment empowerment work that they do. So it's a wide variety, and in conversation with them this week, they are currently accepting new clients, and so that is something that we wanted to ensure. And so the intake number is the best way to get started. You can also visit their website to just get an idea of some of the things that they do offer, to see if that's a resource that would be helpful to you. And then another that is located within our communities is the Community Wellness Ventures. They're on MLK Avenue in Southeast. They're also accepting new clients at this time. What's important to note for them, they are currently only doing telehealth appointments at the moment. If there is a grave need for in-person and that was as preferred or necessary, they said that they could work around that, but primarily they're only doing telehealth. MBI is doing both. You can do in-person with MBI or telehealth, but right now Community Wellness is only telehealth. They do serve children and adults. They serve children starting as young as 4 years of age, and they have a team of individuals that can provide services related to trauma, depression, anxiety, anger, substance use, family challenges, grief and loss, and then all of the services that they provide as well. So once again, both of these resources are currently accepting clients. They're available on their website. You can take a look. Medicaid eligible for both, as well as private insurances are also accepted. And so that was it for the I see some. Okay, great. I see we have some information. Great. Thank you. Dr. Michelle is putting her information in the chat so that folks can follow up. So we have our final chance to win before we close out our time today. And we just want to say thank you for hanging in there and staying with us even through some of the technical challenges. And we hope and pray that it's been a blessing. So let's go ahead and get our final two prizes out for those lucky individuals. The first drawing is for a copy of this wonderful Black Genius guided journal through history and affirmation. So Reverend Carey, you can let us know who is the lucky winner of the journal.
Reverend Jessica, as it is spinning, our winner is, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Melodia Phillips.
Okay.
Melodia Phillips is our winner.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. All righty. And then the winner of the 60-minute session with Ascension Psychological.
Okay, it is spinning. And here we go. Valerie P. Shade. Valerie P. Shade, you are our winner. Congratulations.
Very good. Congratulations, Melodia for the Black Genius Journal and Valerie for the 60-minute session with Ascension. So don't forget, if you won any of the prizes today, please do send a confirmation email to Reverend Carey James. I'll ask him to put his email in the chat again. We just want to verify that we have your correct email. And then later this afternoon, you will receive either your electronic gift card. For those who got the book, I'll just need to get your address on how we can mail that out to you and information on how to access your free session. So thank you. All right. And then lastly, we just want to say what is next, because definitely this is the beginning of a conversation that we know will need to continue. And I think that's been affirmed by what we heard our panelists say and some of your questions and comments. So first and foremost, we want to get your feedback. This is our first time hosting something like this, and we know that there is always room for improvement, and there may be ideas that you have that you could share with us. So you're going to be receiving a participant feedback form later this evening that we just ask you to take time to submit. It won't be very long, just to share your feedback, and that'll help us to plan for future events. Also, as a reminder, everyone who is registered for this event will receive via email, the email you used to register, a copy of today's presentation in full so that you'll be able to have access to it. This is also being recorded, so I believe that once we have all of that prepared, we'll be able to share the audio link as well. So we'll make sure to do that so that you have access to it and can share it with other groups. Again, winners of raffles today, once we have confirmed your email, will receive information later today about accessing your prizes. And then just stay tuned. Now that we have you as a part of our email list through Eventbrite, we're going to be keeping you informed as we begin planning future events. So we'll be letting you know what's coming next. And hopefully there will be topics that you're interested in and ways for this conversation to grow, because that is our goal, to have ongoing conversations where we know that wellness is holistic. And so we've talked a little bit about wellness of the mind, but there's wellness of the body, wellness of the spirit, wellness in our communities. And so we want to be able to have forums and conversations that address all of that. All righty. Well, thank you again to all of our helpers, our ASL interpreters, to Reverend Carey James, our admin, and definitely our panelists from Ascensions, Dr. Haywood, Dr. Opuka, and Dr. Corbett. It was great to have you here, and thank all of you for just taking the time to be with us today. So we pray God's blessings upon you as you go through the rest of your day and into this weekend. And we hope that these are just some seeds that have been planted, or hopefully something affirmed what you're already doing as you move forward into wellness. So be well, everyone, and take care.